probably in the next couple of weeks. To all registered participants, if you did not register online in advance, make sure you do sign in and put your email, and you'll be included in that email with the link to today's recorded events. A little bit of housekeeping. We do have bathrooms that are on the first floor, so you got to go down a flight of stairs. Around the corner, there are signs for them, so if you need to use the restroom, feel free to do so at any time. And with that, I think we'll get ourselves started with our first speaker. Our first speaker is going to be Brad Hammers with the DEC. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for showing up today. When I was asked to come here for a seafood summit here in the Finger Lakes, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to talk about. So hopefully this will be of some interest to you. It's a pretty broad overview of what the DEC does. Then I have a few projects that we've been working on recently that sort of on a statewide basis that I'm going to discuss. And then finally, hopefully have a quick period to talk about some of the more local things here in this Finger Lakes region. My name is Brad Hammers. I've been with the DEC now for approximately 26 years. Work here in Region 8, which runs primarily from Lake Ontario. Hold on a second here. I think we're at the end of this presentation. Where are we at? Yeah, hold on a second. There we go. All right. So yeah, so I'm within Region 8. We run Region 8's 11 counties, goes from basically Lake Ontario to the PA line, from Canisius Lake east to Seneca Lake. So we'll just jump into it right here. Here in New York State, we're very blessed with the diverse fisheries resources that we have throughout the state. There's more than approximately around 165 species located in New York State, and if you freshwater species, and if you count the diadrous species, which are fish that spend part of their lifetime in the marine waters, we have probably close to 172 species out there. Here in Region 8, even we have quite a bit of diversity even within the region. So you can go up into Lake Ontario and catch 30-pound salmon, Chinook salmon. You can go down in the southern tier of the state, catch 6, 7, 8-inch wild native brook trout. And you have Juanita Lake, where you can catch 30 to 40-pound muskies if you're lucky enough. And then even to the west, Watka Creek, brown trout, Canisius Lake walleye. So as you can see, we're very fortunate with the types of species we can go and fish for here within New York State. So how much effort is going on out there in the state? The DEC conducts an angler survey approximately every 10 years. The most recent one occurred in 2017, so this information's a little dated. Should be beginning to plan the next angler survey pretty soon. But as you can see, there's a lot, almost 20 million angler hour or angler days that anglers expend out in our freshwater systems. So the primary species that you can see that that the anglers are fishing for are your warm water species. Over 44% of the anglers target these warm water game fish, and that's primarily targeted at largemouth, smallmouth bass, where that's the most targeted sport fishery in New York State. But we do have a pretty significant fishery targeted towards your cold water species, such as your rainbow trout, brown trout, salmon, Atlantic salmon throughout. So most of this, if you look right here, you can see most of our freshwater fishing occurs in our lakes and ponds, and then with the majority of the rest of it going on within our rivers and streams throughout the state. And just to give you an idea of here in the Finger Lakes region, there are 5 Finger Lakes within the top most 25 fished water bodies in the state. Cayuga Lake being the number 1, followed by Keuka Lake, then Seneca Lake, Canisius Lake, and Canandaigua Lake. So 5 of the 11 Finger Lakes are found in these top 25 water bodies. And this will change again next year. I think the last time we did it, I think it was 2008. Seneca Lake was the most fished finger lake in the state. So these change all the time, but it just gives you an idea that there is a lot of fishing pressure within this part of the region and our state. So probably our most visible part of the DEC is our hatchery system. We have 13 hatcheries spread throughout the state. And these hatcheries stock more than 1,200 streams and lakes throughout the state with over 1 million pounds of fish on an annual basis. These species primarily, most of the stocking is geared towards trout and salmon, like brook trout, brown trout, et cetera, and your Chinook, coho, and Atlantic salmon. There are also some cool water species that we stock throughout the state, walleye, muskie, and such. We do not stock warm water species throughout the state, primarily because they can take care of themselves. There's really no need to stock those species. Natural reproduction does quite well. And we do have some of our hatchery systems are dedicated to stocking or trying to restore some of these other species of fish that have decreased quite a bit throughout their range, trying to bring those back. One of the other things that the DEC is primarily geared towards is providing public access to these water bodies. Like you said, we have a lot of anglers that are out there trying to fish. We have a lot of water throughout the state, over 7,500 lakes and ponds and over 70,000 miles of rivers and streams. So we do manage several boating access sites, fishing access sites, and those are primarily on our lakes and rivers throughout the state. And we also have a lot of public fishing rights, which are fishing easements that the state has purchased from landowners along primarily our trout streams, inland trout streams, or Finger Lakes trout streams. We have, throughout the years, we've acquired nearly 1,300 miles of public fishing rights on more than 400 streams. And what these public fishing rights are permanent easements that allow anglers to access these streams for fishing and fishing only. And these easements are permanent. They're recorded on the deed for the landowner, so the state will not lose these access things. Pardon me. And as you're probably well aware, there's a lot of other state agencies and public municipalities that provide a lot of access to these water bodies as well. One of the big things to find out where all these things are located all this information can be found on our website, looking primarily at the DEC info locator. And just want to point these out. These are good ways to find out where you can go. The other one is the Hunt Fish New York app. On this, and primarily would be looking at the tackle box tool. And this tool, you can download all this information on your phone. You can go out, pick up your phone, look at this app, and point to a stream or a lake or something like that, and it'll tell you what species are in there, what regulations may be found, those sorts of things. So very, very good way to get out there and find out what's going on or where you can go fishing. So I'm just going to talk now about 3 of the major projects that occurred statewide. Recently, we went through a whole revamping of our trout stream management plan or program throughout the state. We went around statewide, talked to a bunch of anglers, trying to find out exactly what they wanted from their experience when they were fishing for trout. And I should note that right now this plan is geared towards our inland trout streams and not our Finger Lake tribs or Great Lake tribs up along Lake Ontario or Lake Erie. But after talking to these anglers, we came up with this plan looking at trying to find out what the anglers want. We wanted to use sound science to figure out how we could get to those desired goals or objectives. And we wanted to place a pretty strong value on our trying to manage towards wild species or self-sustaining species of fish, of trout, primarily brown trout, brook trout. And this is what the plan came up with. If you fish for, how many people here fish or anybody fish in this? I know some people do. Anybody trout fish in any of these streams? So these are, you're probably familiar with these. They broke it down into 3 categories of wild fishing where we do not stock at all, and 2 categories of stock trout fisheries where we put fish in basically at different times of the year. But the big thing about this is a lot of these categories are based on the size of the stream, the carrying capacity of the number of wild trout that this stream can support. Our stocked fisheries are based, again, on effort, how many people are out there fishing. That helps us decide how many fish we should put out there and so on and so forth. As part of this program, we did want to go back and look at where we were stocking these fish. In the past, we've been stocking fish in the state for a long time, and a lot of these streams where we don't have public fishing rights, we stock fish where landowners have graciously allowed public access to these properties. So we figured it'd be time to go back and just find out if anglers still, or if the landowner still wanted anglers coming around and fishing in front of their house or whatever like that. So we went statewide and started sending out letters to landowners, trying to see if they would agree to sign off on information or something that says, okay, yes, we want anglers, or are okay with anglers coming here. And we are in the last year of that. This next year will be our final year reaching out to the various counties that we haven't touched since. We have, through this process, lost a lot of areas where we had stocked in the past, but landowners didn't want us there. But what that means is now at least we're stocking fish where anglers want us there, or where the landowners, pardon me, want us there, and where we're getting a better use or a wise use for our trout, remaining trout sources that we have. The other thing we did is we looked at part of this new trout regulation is we opened up a catch and release season from mid-October to the April 1st, the start of the year. This was in historical trout season was closed, but we wanted to see if there was any impact to opening up these streams to catch and release fishing. Primarily, I don't think we're still in the evaluation standpoint, but I think we're going to be fine and not see any impact from a natural standpoint or reproductive standpoint on these wild fisheries. The next statewide program that we started here a few years ago was our Big Panfish Initiative. We wanted to see if we could pick out some water bodies where we could get some larger panfish out there and make these waters their anglers would be able to target and go and have a pretty good chance of catching a trophy-sized fish. We selected 16 water bodies throughout the state, at least 1 in each region. We're looking at, if you can see, we've got 6 sunfish where these regulations or this program targeted just trying to get bigger sunfish, which would be your bluegills, pumpkin seeds. We have 5 where we had crappies that we were looking at, and 5 where both species could be found, or that we're trying to jump up the size in these lakes for both species. Here in Region 8, we have Honeoye Lake, which we're looking at both panfish and crappie, and Juanita and Lamoka Lakes, where we're looking at just crappie. Primarily, the sunfish regulations jumped up quite a bit. We went from any size to 50 to an 8-inch minimum size limit to where you could only keep 15 per day. For crappie, this was a statewide jump, but we were sort of violent. We went from a 9-inch minimum size limit to a 10-inch minimum size limit, but kept the creel limit at 25 inches, or 25 fish, pardon me. This is the last year of the evaluation for field work, but just looking at the preliminary numbers, it looks like the sunfish, we're seeing mixed results. Some of them are getting bigger fish, some we're not seeing any changes, and some of the fish seem to be stacking up under the 8-inch, so we'll see how that goes. Crappie, we do seem to think that fish are moving up a little bit throughout this process. We're starting to see larger fish. And finally, our black bass fishing tournament permit. Up until 2025, if you wanted to hold a tournament, a bass fishing tournament, there was no registry through New York State. Now, any tournament where there's at least 10 or more anglers targeting black bass, which are your largemouth and smallmouth bass, you would have to get a permit from the DEC. This is will provide us with pretty good information finally. We had a good idea how many tournaments were out there, but we didn't have an exact number. Now we'll know exactly what's going on throughout the state. And also we will, part of the permit requirement is we report biological information back to us. So we'll be able to get a sort of start tracking what kind of, or how many fish or anglers are catching throughout these tournaments. Pardon me. So like I said, this was the first year. So far, we've approved 521, this information is just from a couple weeks ago. We've approved 521 tournaments. The vast majority of those have anywhere from 10 to 50 participants throughout. So people are getting seems like the word got out and we are getting some good feedback, or at least we're going to be getting some good information throughout the next few years throughout this process. And finally, just briefly hit these last few things. These are more on a regional basis. Keuka Lake, we had a forage-based decline, or actually a collapse in the lake, and we started seeing impacts with the other fisheries resources out there, primarily lake trout. So we tried to look at reintroducing a native forage species out there, the Cisco. Results to date, probably not doing so well at this point in time. There's a lot of predators out there, and it seems like whatever we dump in there, they're just getting eaten up right now. But we are working with Cornell University, looking at different methods, maybe stocking methods, where we may be able to increase the success of these stockings. So we haven't given up yet, but so far we haven't had a lot of success. The biggie here is Seneca and Cayuga Lake sea lamprey control. If you fish these two Finger Lakes just down the road here, not too far away, you know, if sea lamprey get out of control, we start having some pretty significant impacts on the fishery. Seneca Lake, about 10 years ago, we missed a few lamprey treatments out there. The population got pretty high, and although it wasn't the only reason, we had some impacts to the predators, lake trout and other rainbow trout, brown trout, whatever. My phone started ringing off the hook and anglers were pretty concerned. We do think we have this the sea lamprey back under control a little bit. We think we've taken a turn, and hopefully things will move along in a better direction here over the next few years. And finally, whenever we do our surveys throughout the state, throughout the region, we do collect fish for the statewide monitoring program for contaminants, heavy metals, whatever. And I think the I saw you were on the list, so I'll just leave it at that because that'll be what you're talking about. So with that, I think I'll end. Take any questions if you have any. I know that was just there was a lot to talk about, and I just tried to hit a few different things real fast. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
And before asking your question, please wait for the mic just so our online participants can also hear that.
Can you tab back to your pie charts?
Which pie with
At the beginning, you showed angler participation.
the angler participation?
Are you collecting data on age groups participating in?
There is some data on that. Unfortunately, I can't remember exactly what the participation is, but the angling contingent is definitely aging, if that's what you were getting at. I don't know if that's where you were moving.
It is. I was curious
Yeah.
if you could do a demographic overlay showing where the young anglers are starting to fish.
I would have to look back to the specifics of that, but yes, definitely the population's aging. The anglers are getting older. We're not seeing a huge influx of youth into the program, but there is, like I said, that information, actually, you could go online. If you look up the 2017 Angler Survey, it would spell that out in that, if you wanted to do that.
Could you use funds from the Pittman-Robinson Act for education?
We do a lot of education already through the program, through the state. We do have an outreach section within the state trying to do fishing, derbies, fishing days for youth. We do try to do a lot of that, trying to get angler groups to assist with those sort of programs. We do free fishing days, I think 4 times a year. trying to get as many different groups that we can out there to try to drum up support for the fisheries throughout the state, so.
Any other questions? Okay, and online participants, feel free to raise your hand or put a question in the chat. All right. Well, thank you, Brad. All right, so I'm gonna start to pull up the presentation, but I'll invite Stephen Japp up next with Roy's Boys and Roy's Boys Marina to talk a little bit about their operation. Oops. Oh, there you go.
Use the keypad to turn it now.
Either that, or you can use the clicker. Where'd it go? Though? There we go. All right. Yep, it'll work too.
Alrighty, all set.
All right. Yep.
Alrighty, well, I'm Stephen Japp. I grew up right up here in Geneva. My parents run Roy's Marina. It's a family-ran business. Since 1953, my grandpa Roy, he started it. He was in the service, and when he was in the service, he met some people that were from the area that told him about the great fishing and hunting in the area. Back then, it was mainly just local people going out catching mainly lake trout that time, from what I hear. And back then, they would rent boats out. I think they were getting like $1 a rental a day, and just renting just rowboats. And I think it was like $1.25 to have a boat with a motor on it. Back then, it was my grandma Barb, my grandpa Roy. My grandpa Roy, he was an X-ray technician, so my grandma Barb was at the marina, dealing with everything, people launching their boats. Back then, they used to deal a lot with Penny Ann boats. They were a dealer for them, and you know, they're no longer dealing today, but mainly back then it was just kind of recreation, you know, like Sampson Navy base and Air Force Base out there. There's a lot of people that work there that were staying on the lake, so a lot of families. Today, what we mainly do is canoe, kayak, paddle boards. You can see in the middle there, like small fishing boats. People can rent a small fishing boats, go out and try their luck out there. And then we have our winter storage, shrink wrapping, boat rentals, like our bow riders. We have ski boats, pontoon boats are pretty popular. We're getting a lot of people in that, you know, renting Airbnbs and have big parties. They want to get out there on the lake and enjoy it. So we have the bigger boats for them. And this is what I do. I got a 26-foot Penny Ann I bought from a local guide about 8 years ago. You can see it's all rigged out for deep water fishing, mainly from April till Columbus Day. I run this boat, and you can see I got the downriggers, and it's all rigged to the max. I mean, I got tons of rod. I think I got like 30 rods in there, and still buying them for some reason. But I got planer boards I run in the spring for covering water horizontally. I got I'll run like 6 planer boards. And then I got my 3 downriggers I run, and they call them dipsy divers. They're like a disc that dives down in the water that covers more water. But mainly I use the downriggers there for going down in the deeper water. Everybody comes in, they're staying, you know, Airbnbs, hotels and all that. They're in the area. So, you know, Seneca Lake being the lake trout capital of the world, people are wanting to get the lake trout. So the downriggers, they allow me to go anywhere from 1 foot down to 200 feet down if I have to, but that's pretty much the setup there. I could fit up to 6 people on that and run that. And then I got some catches here. These group of kids, they came up, they came out with me a couple times, but you can see it's just mostly lake trout in that picture. Pretty good day there. And then these guys here, they come out with me about once or twice a year. They stay at Sampson, a big group of them. And I do pick up at Sampson. So, you know, lucky for these guys, we just fish nice and close there and caught them guys. But you can see this was early spring here. You have your landlocked salmon, your rainbow, brown trout at the bottom with the spots on them. And then this year is last year we ended up getting a nice big laker, about 12 pounds. And you can see the landlocked salmon over there. But most of the time it's just families coming out that are looking to enjoy the nice lake and catch some lakers. But here's a couple nice trophy rainbows we got. The one on the right here was from last year, and it was nice. I think that one was right around 8 pounds, but nice, good looking fish. And a funny story on the picture on the left there, these guys, he's actually from South Africa, and they came up and they called up, and about 2 days prior, they wanted to cancel the trip because they heard that Seneca Lake was bad fishing, and they're from South Africa, and I guess that there they catch a lot of 12 to 15-inch rainbow trout. And, you know, I'm sitting there like, hey, it's up to you guys, whatever you want to do. But I think they were at a brewery or something, and somebody said, you know, save your money, fish elsewhere. And we ended up going down the lake to a spot, and we caught a 30-inch rainbow, and I figured he had to be right around the 12-pound mark. And they were pretty happy. They never seen a rainbow that big before, and it's my personal best rainbow there. But we're starting to see a lot more rainbows like this showing up, a lot more between like the 6 and 8 pound range out there, and that. And then from the springtime, well, late fall, probably Columbus Day till April. Right now we're catching them too. But you can see like these people over here, they did like a split trip where we fished for salmon, rainbows, and browns. We used planer boards for them, and then they wanted to go out and catch perch, and we went out and we caught some perch out there the same trip. I don't usually like doing split trips because it's almost like you got to find them and then switch over, and if the perch aren't biting, then you kind of got to go back to plan A again. But you can see the perch here is a good day out. Mainly I do this from, I'd say about December through April is when perch is really hot out here in Seneca, but nobody wants to fish. They're all fair weather fishermen. And then, you know, Seneca is known for the big perch out here. This is one of them here. I think that one was about 2.5 pounds. And then the cooler full there. And then just recently we started seeing the gobies coming in. Honestly, I couldn't wait for them to come in, but you know, you see all these other lakes that have them, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, Oneida Lake, and their fisheries are just thriving out there, you know, because they have these gobies. And my theory is that they're just slow and soft, and these fish just love them because they're in the shallow water and easy food source. But this one right here, it actually came out of a lake trout stomach, and I think it was like right around 100 feet of water. We caught the lake trout, and when I cleaned it, it had that one in it. But they're showing up more and more. And then, you know, you got the invasive lamprey eel there. And then this over here, I got an Instagram where I kind of posted some videos where this was like 4 years ago when the lampreys were really, really bad. And, you know, like the COVID years and that. And the top picture up there with the lake trout, you could see those ones there, I actually scooped on the side of my boat. They were stuck on my boat, like the bottom picture here. And I was over there with a net, just scooping them up. And I had clients out there, and they're all, you know, freaking out. Like, what are these things attached to me? And, you know, can we swim out here? And it's like, you could swim out there. I don't know what they like about the boat, but the past few years, we've been seeing a decrease in the lampreys and that. But yeah, I got some pretty cool videos of just sticking the GoPro underneath the boat and seeing all the eels on there. And then, you know, you got the fillets and that. When we go out, I'll clean them and that. And I'd say probably 80% of the people that fish with me, they keep them because they're either staying at an Airbnb or Samson or a campground and want to enjoy them there. And then this is like from a group that I brought out a couple years ago, and a bunch of Italians, they came out and from Jersey, and they invited me down, and they ended up cooking up some trout tacos there, and they were really good there. And that's that. Yeah, any
Great.
questions or anything?
Thanks, Stephen. Any questions for Stephen?
Yeah. So what do you think about the lamprey population as it relates? Are you seeing more wounds, scars, that sort of information, or you think it's moving down?
It's definitely decreasing. I mean, from 4 years ago when, you'd catch them on like your downrigger balls and stuff, you'd drop your downriggers down, the big heavy weight down 90 feet and you'd pull it up and you'd see a lamprey or two on them, which you do get once in a while, but nothing like how it was a couple years ago where you'd look over and you'd see them, they'd grab the prop of the boat and you'd actually see them spinning down there in that. But last year and a couple years ago, I really haven't seen too many of them, but I guess I was just so used to the bad years that, I was like, man, there's not that many around, but yeah, you guys definitely did a good job of knocking down the eels and that.
All right. I just want to say that Roy's Marina has been very helpful to us over the years as far as a good place to work at and a good place for information. So we appreciate that.
Yeah,
But thank you.
Yeah, I try to relay what I can to you guys and that.
So we have an online question. What's the cost to take 3 people out for perch in the next 30 days?
The next 30 days, I usually get 200 for 3 people for 4 hours. I usually get, but I don't clean them because if you catch a lot of them, I'll be there for, about just as long as it took catching them. So, but yeah, the perch fishing's pretty good right now. It's like I said, everybody's staying away because the weather's so cold, but once it warms up, I'll be out there chasing them.
Oh, we've got one more.
Another question?
Hi. Thanks for the very nice presentation.
Yeah. No.
I was just curious about your thoughts on the previous question from the audience about youth participation and if you think it's changed or if you think it's increasing or pretty consistent.
Yeah. Mostly what I see is at the marina, you see a lot of like the younger generation, like targeting bass and that, they like their bass fishing and, they come in and, they're rigged up good. They got their rods and artificial baits and that. But this year, what I want to do is I kind of want to do a giveaway. Like a couple years ago, there was that one picture I showed you was like a birthday party out there where, they gave that to their son for a birthday gift, and it was 1 adult and 5 kids out there. But this year I kind of want to do like a giveaway where, it's like, hey, same kind of deal, maybe 1 adult and 5 kids can come out and fish with me and see that. But definitely want to do something in the future as far as getting more kids out there and that. But it's just the kind of fishing I do is, you got to have the boat and that to get out there and troll. But you do see a lot of kids that are taking on bass fishing and, they want to catch that big bass, big largemouth bass out there. But yeah.
Great. Any other questions for Stephen?
Hi, thank you, Stephen, for coming. I was curious what your thoughts were on, the big question, at least in Seneca Lake, of lake trout population. So concerns have been raised over the past years about lake trout numbers. What is your sense being on the water so much?
The past couple, when I first started, I was averaging probably like 8 years ago. I think that's when everybody was kind of saying how bad the fishing was and that. And I think that was kind of like the peak water clarity. But recently I've been averaging more numbers, a lot more smaller ones out there, like between like the 15 and 20 inch mark. And I think with these gobies coming in, I think that the lake trout are going to more key in on them, where prior, most of my lake trout came from like 130 feet down, where I think kind of these gobies hang out in the shallow water. So I think a lot of the lake trout would be caught in shallower water in that, and you'll start seeing some more numbers in that, of lake trout because they're in that shallower water. But I'd say the brown trout are probably the biggest strugglers out there. They hang out with the lamprey. I think the same temperature as the lamprey eels and that, and they get eaten up by the eels. But I would like to see the browns come back. There's a lot of salmon rainbows that are showing up now, like the bigger rainbows. But I'd say the browns are probably the ones that struggle the most out there with the eels and that. But definitely a good population of lake trout out there. There's a lot of bait out there for them. So, but really haven't seen anything over, like I'd say probably 13, 14 pounds, like prior years in the lake trout derby. It's hard to see, those big fish like we used to see out there. But but they're there. They're just outsmarting everybody, I guess.
All right, any last questions? And then maybe, Stephen, if you want to let those online know how they can find you if they're interested in perch in the next 30 days.
Yeah, you can go on Roy's Boys, fishandcharters.com. I'm on social media. I got a Facebook, Roy's Boys Charters, and my Instagram that I try to post everything on because it's quick and easy. And but yeah, want to do some perch fishing, let me know and get you out there.
All right, thank you, Stephen.
All righty, thank you.
All right, so I'm going to invite our colleagues at the Department of Health up next. I'm going to get their presentation up, and they're going to talk about their fish health program and the testing that they do, as well as the outreach and education program. Advance for you. You should be good.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mackenzie Palmer, and then you'll hear from me first, and then you'll hear from my colleague, Audrey. But I'm going to kind of give you guys a little overview of our New York State Department of Health Fish Advisory Program. I work in our department, or in our Bureau of Toxic Substance Assessment, in the program of sustainability, and I've only been working in the fish program for about a couple of years, but I've definitely learned a lot in my time here and learned a lot about fish in the couple of years. But our fish advisory program has been around for quite a long time. We've been issuing advice on eating fish that you catch from our local waters for about 50 years. We work really closely with the Department of Environmental Conservation, the DEC. They help catch the fish and analyze them for a bunch of different contaminants. And then they send that data to us, and we use that to inform our advisories. The DEC collects about 1,500 fish from more than 50 locations in a year. And like I said, we use that to inform our advice. We also work with the DEC on technical things, as well as getting that advice out to the general public and making sure that they're informed on what they can eat from their local waterways. We use a risk management approach when we create our advisories. This includes quality and quantity of data. We also do species-specific advice because some species of fish collect more chemicals than others, which will come into play when I talk about our statewide advice. We also consider chemical trends over time. So if there's populations of fish that seem to have increasing chemicals over time, we might make our advice more restrictive. We also consider multiple years of data when we are trying to to lessen our restrictions and make it so that you can eat more fish from some of our waters, because we do recognize that fish are a very important source of nutrients. And that brings me to our last point, is that we like to take into account the benefits of eating fish. I've currently been writing a paper about this, and there are just so many important nutrients that we get from fish that we don't get from other food sources. And so it's definitely important that we're encouraging people to eat fish while also advising them on the risk of some of these chemicals. So in New York State, we have guidelines for PCBs, mercury, those new forever chemicals that everybody seems to be talking about, PFAS, as well as some other contaminants like pesticides. In these guidelines, we estimate human health risk. We also have standards and guidelines that we take into account from other authoritative bodies like the EPA and the FDA. And there is what we call the Great Lakes Consortium for Fish Consumption Advisories. It includes states as well as Canadian provinces that surround the Great Lakes, and we all collaborate to create these advisories and try to make sure that they're kind of standard and easy to follow for our anglers. These guidelines, we update them when we get new information. Our PCB guidelines were updated in 2020. Our mercury guidelines for the Adirondacks and the Catskills were updated in 2021. And then we just recently published some new statewide advice that's species specific, and that was published last year in the spring. Our PFAS guidelines were updated in 2019, but we have some new guidelines after the EPA put out their new drinking water guidelines. We have been revisiting our PFAS guidelines, and we'll be coming out with some new ones here in the spring as well. So keep an eye out for those. When we're creating our guidelines, we like to think about who the populations are that are eating fish. And one of those, so we have two different populations. We have our general population, which is men and women over 50. And then our sensitive population is children under 15 and anyone who can become pregnant under 50. The reason for having these two different populations is that people in the sensitive population, like children, can be very sensitive to chemical exposure when they are developing, not only as young children, but also in utero. They have different metabolism, so some of these chemicals might stay in their body for longer, or they might not be able to metabolize them as easily as adults. Certain chemicals can accumulate in different parts of our body, and some of them stick around for longer, which means that your exposure is for a longer period of time. And many of the chemicals that you can find in fish can be passed from mom to baby, like I said, in utero or through breast milk. So there's many ways that children can be exposed. And so we like to account for that when we're creating our advice. Chemicals are considered a special risk to children. And like lead, they are not good for anybody, but a lot of times they're especially bad for children. So we want to protect our upcoming generations. So like I said, we have multiple types of fish advisories for different chemicals. This is not the most up-to-date map because it doesn't include our PFAS advisories, but it just kind of shows you all the different types of advisories we have around New York State. The upper green blob in the state is the Adirondacks, and you can see that there's a lot of green diamonds in there. Mercury is one of the most concerning chemicals in the Adirondacks, as well as in the Catskills, which is that lower green blob. But you can also see that we have advice for PCBs in the Great Lakes area. You can see a couple, and down in Long Island and New York City, a couple of advisories for dioxin. And we also do advice for heavy metals too, like cadmium and pesticides we also take into consideration as well. There's about 140 waters in New York State that have specific advice. We create specific advice when data shows that fish concentrations are above guidelines that we have, as well as in addition to other factors. As I said, a variety of chemicals can trigger fish advisories from PCBs, mercury, PFAS, Murex, chlorine, dieldrin. And our specific advice usually has more restrictive or protective advice for the sensitive population, as I said, wanting to protect those children and pregnant people. In New York State, we have mercury-based regional advisories. Two of the regions that we have specific advisories for include the Adirondack and the Catskills. As I said, and like you saw in the last image, there are a lot of water bodies that have mercury contamination in those areas, and so we have specific regional advice due to that mercury contamination. And then, as I said earlier, we have a statewide advice that's also based on, that we published last year, and that's also based on mercury. And we created those using data that showed trends of mercury levels in different species of fish. So these are examples of our Adirondack regional advice and our Catskill regional advice. Our Adirondack regional advice is on the left. And as you can see, it's fairly restrictive. Our sensitive population is only recommended to eat 1 meal a month of fish from any Adirondack waterways. And again, as I said, this is because of mercury contamination, historical mercury contamination in the Adirondack Park. And then our Catskill regional advice is a little more, is a little less restrictive. There's a small 4 species of fish that our sensitive population can eat 4 meals a month of. And as you can see, we've separated them into best choice fish, eat less, and then, don't eat fish. And this is, again, trends that we've seen in the data that show that some fish collect more chemicals, collect more mercury than others. And following, so we created that those regional advisories first, and that led us to look at statewide data, which informed our statewide advisory. And so some of you might have seen this. If you're anglers, you might have seen this recently on our website. And I believe that our outreach and education program has been around the state, showing off our new statewide advice and informing anglers around the state of it. But again, we have our best choice fish at the top, and it goes all the way down to our eat less and, maybe don't eat fish. So those yellow perch that you want to go out fishing for, those are some of the best ones you can eat. So some of the common chemicals in New York State fish, like I said, mercury is definitely one of them, but so is PCBs, dioxin, and pesticides. There are some ways that you can mitigate your exposure to these chemicals, particularly PCBs. They build up in the skin and the fat of the fish. And so you can actually reduce your exposure to these chemicals by filleting them and cooking them so that the fat drips off. So we don't recommend that you fry them if they have PCBs in them. Mercury is a little bit more difficult. It collects in the muscle or the fillet of the fish, which most people are likely to eat. And you can't remove it by cooking. And so these advisories that we create across the state and for specific waters are really important to pay attention to make sure that you're choosing fish that are lower in mercury. One of the new contaminants that everybody is talking about is PFAS, the one that we are most concerned about. So there's a bunch of different PFAS chemicals, but the one that we're most concerned about is PFOS. It's the one that is most commonly found in fish. It can be found in the liver, the brain, the blood, and the muscle tissue. In communities that eat the whole fish, they're more at risk than those that traditionally just eat the fillet, obviously, because they're being exposed to those other organ systems. It's not lipophilic, so it doesn't just collect in the fat. It tends to bind to proteins, particularly in the liver and the blood. And again, we really advise people to follow our advisories to choose fish that are lower in PFAS. And we are coming out with some new, those new PFAS guidelines to help inform our anglers on what waters to fish from and what fish to eat. And that brings us to our outreach part. Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. My name is Audrey Vangenechten. I also work for DOH. I work in our outreach and education unit. I've been working on fish advisory outreach for about 14 years, and primarily my coworker and I, Thomas, have historically worked a lot on the Hudson River. Obviously, that's like a huge Superfund site, and there's separate funding. But a lot of the work that we do on Hudson, we try to also apply across the state because there are tons of fantastic fishing opportunities. So we reach the fishing public by doing tons and tons of outreach and public events throughout the year. We were actually just down at the Rockland Outdoor Show in Suffern for the past 3 days. A couple weeks ago, I was in Niagara Falls doing that outdoor show, just trying to talk with anglers. Our advice is available on our DOH website, as well as we have free literature like the brochures that you'll see in the back. We distribute these to all our partners, various municipalities, parks, libraries, bait shops. We work with a lot of different fishing organizations and programs, and we especially try to reach out to low-income families, food banks, and other groups that may be supplementing their diets with quite a bit of fish. In the Hudson Valley, we fund several community partners to help us get the word out, and we table at community fairs or community festivals, county fairs, and fishing and hunting shows pretty much like throughout the year to talk with anglers. During the process of adopting the new statewide, we had to redo our suite of brochures, so those have been completed. They are now by fish, which is kind of cool. So on any of the brochures, you pretty much open to the first page and you'll see a selection of fish, and you can go to that page and go find out what the advisories are for the region. We also have a variety of materials available in a bunch of different languages. This year we'll also have our other, like our leather stocking, Finger Lakes, and Western available in Spanish as well. We redid the website last year to accommodate the new statewide advice. So you're able to search for waters by county as well as alphabetical. There's like a new feature on our website that allows easy translation of our website. It's like that top bar, which is really nice because we do find we have a lot of newcomers in New York that love to fish. And so that's a huge population essentially that we are trying to get the word out to. We also have a new search by fish feature that will be coming soon. So we spend a lot of time answering, where can I eat the fish? Historically, the DOH fish advisories were sort of negative. I mean, it pretty much only told people where the chemicals were in the fish and where they should avoid eating the fish. So one of the things that our program has really spent the past 10 years doing was flipping that message and being like, yes, okay, so there are some waters where there are limitations and maybe it's not great for the whole family to eat from, but there's actually tons of waters around you where the whole family can eat the fish. And so, you know, the positive messaging really helps anglers be able to make those choices for themselves. And it also helps them not feel as though like everything is terrible. You know, I mean, it's like, it gets really overwhelming when you just like are constantly hearing like, especially we're working in the Hudson River area, right? So it's like, there are sections where it's literally catch and release only. But, you know, like, you have like Lake George, not that far. You have Saratoga Lake. There's lots of places that people can eat the fish. And so in this process, we started doing a county mapping project, essentially that shows tributaries with the health advice overlaid on it. And so our advice will go up to the first impassable barrier for fish. And these maps are essentially color-coded to help people make better choices. So in this example, the lightest blue is our statewide advice. That's sort of the best choice waters. The purple waters have some advisories, but typically there's still a lot of fish that everyone in the family can eat. And then red waters, like in this case, Onondaga Lake, obviously there's a pretty bad history of contamination. These maps allow people to understand like how far that Onondaga advice goes to. We have these maps completed for 21 counties. They're online. We hand them out when we're out in the public. It also is like a really great tool for people that are just getting into fishing to kind of like point them in the direction. If they're interested in eating the fish they catch, it really helps them kind of like hone in on waters. And in addition, you know, it's great for people that are looking for new places to try. We've also been using social media to get the word out in the past couple of years. These are typically paid campaigns where we'll target people who are interested in angling. So it's essentially a direct link to the health department website. A lot of people know our advice from the back of the regulations guide, and oftentimes people think it's the DEC that are actually issuing those advisories. So this has been really helpful to get the word out. It has, like, you know, you can see a tremendous increase in website traffic when we do run these like ads essentially. And especially last year, it was very important because the general advisory, which was 4 meals a month of, you know, fish from waters without specific advisories, changed to that the specific advisory table that Mackenzie showed earlier. In the process of doing the statewide, we needed to learn a little bit more about angler preferences as well. because in the past, it didn't really matter what people preferred because the advice was so general. It was 4 meals a month for everybody. Whatever fish you catch from this water, go for it. So we wanted to make sure that the species that were most important to New Yorkers, we were really taking a closer look at. So in 2023, DEC offered us the opportunity to essentially survey licensed anglers. We did this in early summer. It was only open for about 2 weeks, and we got almost 8,000 responses. And most of the respondents had been fishing for a long time. So, I mean, this goes back to that demographic where it is definitely an older demographic that has been fishing for a long time. Most people responded that they were just eating fish a couple times a year, but there was about 30% that reported that they were eating it a couple times a month. So there is definitely still a pretty good portion of the population that is eating fish regularly. Generally, where do you most often fish? And this was a multiple choice, so they could choose up to 3. Trout streams, ocean, Adirondack ponds, and lakes were the top 3, followed by Lake Ontario, the Finger Lakes generally. We actually had a pretty good response rate from Long Island, so some of the answers were skewed for marine a little bit. What species are you most likely to eat? Yellow perch, trout, walleye, striped bass. And what advice are you most likely to follow to reduce exposure? Because ultimately we can issue tons and tons of advice, but if no one is willing to follow it, then what's the point, right? So avoid fishing in certain waters was the top choice, which is nice to hear because that is something that essentially our mapping program accomplishes. We can tell people to kind of like focus on a different water. Skinning and trimming fillets, which is great for those waters that have PCB issues. That includes Hudson River around New York City and the Great Lakes. And avoid eating certain species. And, you know, there's a lot of people that just practice catch and release. They don't like fish or, you know, it's too much work. They're just out there for the sport of it. And I'm just going to put this up here for a second just to highlight. So we have spent a lot of time working with our Burmese and Karen refugees. These are folks that have been in the country for really 10 to 15 years. They came from Myanmar or Burma. And there are large populations of these folks living in New York State. 30% of the population of Buffalo is actually essentially from the Burmese diaspora. And they are avid anglers. And they, when we have done some studies, they were actually eating sometimes on average over 200 fish meals per year, which is a little higher than the average 16, which is what the typical sort of like average angler, New York State licensed angler reported eating. In some places like Buffalo and Syracuse, they were also eating much different species than your average angler. And so these are things that we've had to consider and work with DEC on getting some samples of these fish. Because like we had never like even thought about quillback. Like that's not something that we had data for at all. In Albany, we don't really have as many like huge waters with a lot of different species. So their preferences were a lot, you know, they were pretty similar to sort of your average angler. And, you know, cultural differences really can increase exposure to some of these chemical. Our outreach to the newcomers is important. They're often less aware of contamination. You know, people who grew up here know about Onondaga Lake. People who grew up here know about the Hudson River. A lot of these folks are coming in. The waters look better than they ever have before, and there's more access. They can be difficult to connect with. We really need to rely on community partners to help identify and connect groups that we can work with. And they have cultural practices that may put them at higher risk, like eating the whole fish, preferring fatty species like catfish and carp, making fish paste, or like preferring things like eating crab tamale in the Hudson River, which is kind of where a lot of the contaminants build up in a crab. There's language and literacy barriers, so we need to use different strategies and different materials to try to reach these folks. And as I mentioned, some of the newcomers were eating substantially more local fish. And why believe us? You know, I mean, it's tough. Chemicals are invisible. You don't feel immediately sick from eating, you know, fish that may be high in chemicals. If you did, I wouldn't have a job. I wouldn't need to be here. People think that they can tell if fish have chemicals. A lot of folks have that belief. Like I said, the water looks cleaner and there's more waterfront access available. And, you know, I work for the government. Like a lot of folks are coming from countries where, you know, they don't want to believe what the government is telling them. They feel as though it's not good. I had mentioned the Burmese anglers. We've done several focus groups between 2022 and 2024 to try to develop these regional guides. We worked with a variety of folks from those, they have essentially like different kind of ethnic groups that come from the same place. We worked with folks across the state, Albany, Syracuse, and Buffalo. And we've developed essentially regional guides that came from their feedback that really are very specific to the places that they're fishing and to the style of sort of trimming and skinning or cooking that they are used to. And, you know, even places like the North Country have expanding demographics of people who love to fish. So while American anglers, I would say, are generally aging, right? There's a lot of new people that are coming in that are very young and extremely passionate about fishing from a lot of different cultures. So for us, we're trying to also make sure that we are expanding our resources and keeping up with different materials that can easily be handed out and essentially reach folks of different languages. So this was actually something that came out of a conversation with folks in Plattsburgh. They have Haitian Creole and Spanish speakers that love fishing from Lake Champlain, and so they needed something that was easy to hand out for them. Finger Lakes focus, really fast. So based on our, oh, I don't have my notes. So based on our mapping scheme, right? So essentially we have a couple lakes that do have some historic contamination, Canadice and Onondaga. We have those purple lakes in the middle that during the statewide process, when we were looking at mercury, they came back high for a couple fish. Mostly it's just yellow perch. I think Owasco has, I think, a rainbow trout advisory, a walleye advisory, and a yellow perch advisory. But the thing that's kind of nice about the new process for setting advice, especially when it's mercury, it's typically a restriction on just one species, and all the other fish, you just follow the statewide. So the general population can still eat most species from those waters. So it's much less restrictive than it used to be, where anytime a specific advisory was placed, we would say sensitive population don't eat. We've really tried to move away from that approach and just essentially try to encourage the sensitive population to eat fish that are lower in the chemicals. And then the guys that you see in the pale blue, so like, I'm gonna mess up the pronunciation, but like Honeyoi, for example, Canandaigua, those lakes you follow the statewide. And Oneida Lake is actually very low in mercury. So we were able to issue a less restrictive advice than statewide. So for people that are like really interested in fishing for walleye and smallmouth bass, there are essentially 3 waters in New York State where there's less restrictive advice than statewide. Oneida, Lake Ontario, and Lake Erie all had very low mercury. So those advisories are slightly less restrictive. That's it. Questions?
Thank you, Audrey and Mackenzie. Questions? For those online participants, feel free to put it in the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to unmute.
Your results are impacted by your collection efforts. So how are you collecting?
Like fish, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, the DEC does that for us. But essentially when we review data from a water body, we look at, you know, how many years of collections do we have? What kinds of fish do we have from these waters? Sometimes we reach out to the DEC and ask them, you know, what species are more likely to be found in this specific water body. And depending on, you know, what the chemical concentrations are in the fish, that'll determine, you know, what species we ask for. If the levels are really high, we might say, hey, can you collect from this water body again and collect these species, you know, like if we see PCBs high in, you know, one of our usually best choice fish, we might go, hey, can you also collect like carp or catfish, because usually PCBs are higher in that fish, but we don't have data for it. So can you collect those so we can see if like those fish are impacted as well? So a lot of factors go into how we make decisions on what fish we collect, but we typically ask them to collect as many fish for us as we can. We like to have at least 10 fish for a sample, but we'll make advice on using at least 4 fish. And so, yeah, like I said, it takes a lot of considerations into account.
Okay. Are you studying or examining tissue culture for microplastics out of Lake Ontario?
We don't do that. My job is very desk based. Looking at data results from fish tissue, but I did do my PhD at U of R, and there were some labs there that were studying microplastics in Lake Ontario water samples. I don't know if they were looking at fish tissue, but yeah, I had a colleague that was working on that. I don't know what the results are. I couldn't tell you, but.
Last question. How about the Finger Lakes for picocyanobacteria?
Oh, I don't know. Do you know?
I mean, DEC and DOH work closely on all the like microcystins and the blue-green algae. Pretty much our advice is that if you see an active bloom, you should not be fishing because it's a contact issue. More so even than like if it is microcystin in the fish. There is another group within DOH that is working closely with DEC. They could probably tell you more about that. I'm happy to give you that info if you want. But that does not typically factor into the fish advisories, which is just contaminant based.
You might want to talk to the folks at University of New Hampshire.
Cool. Thank you.
Any other online? All right, a few online questions.
So I'm going to start with one that's kind of a twofold question.
Okay.
So where is the mercury coming from?
Want me to answer that?
Yeah, go ahead. You've been in the program longer than
Yeah,
me.
so essentially the mercury is historic contamination. It's still actively depositing. A lot of it comes from essentially coal burning. The same rain falls across all of New York State, but our Adirondack region, our Catskills, and our reservoirs are more susceptible for that mercury to be turned into the organic form, which bioaccumulates in fish.
Gotcha. Okay.
And some of it is naturally occurring. We do have some in our soils, and some of it is released through volcanic activity and forest fires, which certainly have been happening. But it's mostly anthropogenic. It's mostly man-made.
And so building on that was, they were wondering if there was remediation, if you kind of know where they're coming from, are there things that can be done to stop them at this point?
I mean, a while ago, right, like 30 years ago, there was a lot of work done to try to reduce the emissions from the Midwest. Other folks may, I mean, do you have something that you want to add to this? No? Either of you? No? Roxanne? Is this your gig?
Oh, you're doing a great job, Audrey. You could give my presentation. Just in terms of remediation, you can do specific local remediation, right? Like we've seen in Onondaga Lake, a ton of money put in and really great results coming out of that. And then in terms of reducing a mercury exposure in our fish, the best thing is to support rules that reduce mercury emissions to the atmosphere. So I'll talk a little bit more about that too.
Great. Yeah.
And then there was another, like building off of, still on the mercury topic, is there a consumer mercury testing kit that people could use on the fish?
Oh.
They could
Oh, on the
test.
fish.
Not?
I don't think on the fish. I know that sometimes, if you're experiencing, like if you eat a lot of fish that are higher in mercury, like you can definitely have mercury poisoning. And so your doctor might test for that, like test your blood for mercury levels. But I don't think that there's a consumer test for fish. No.
Gotcha. And then kind of getting off of mercury specific, Have you worked with indigenous communities to learn about their harvesting and eating practices and to support
Yes.
them? with outreach?
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, we did a big project about 10 years ago with the St. Regis Mohawk tribe. They collaborated with DOH and we created essentially, that's like where these regional guide, the idea for these regional guides essentially came from. They created their own advisories using a mix of state data and their own environment division. We are in contact frequently with the Onondaga Nation. Less so with the Seneca Nation, but there is more happening sort of with tribal relations. And it's something that, we're happy to work with folks on as they need resources or any support for any of this kind of stuff.
And the last kind of comment going back to the coal stuff, is it possible that it's coming from other states that are still using more coal and stuff and it's just getting into the atmosphere and then it's coming back down?
Definitely. Yeah.
And other countries as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Questions in the room or online? Audrey and want to have some of these resources available to their patrons, they can still for free order them through your website and have them mailed to their location?
Correct. And we didn't bring any because we don't actually have like a Finger Lakes based poster, but we have posters for Lake Erie and Lake Ontario and the tidal Hudson that are very popular. They're very nice photos of fish on one side and then advice on the back side. So that's something that we're hoping to make soon for the Finger Lakes. And all of our materials are always free. They're available online to order, and we'll ship them right to you. So.
We also have examples of all of our, sorry, people online, but everybody in the room, we have examples of our booklets and stuff and pamphlets that we've made in the back, and you're more than welcome to take one.
Great. Last call for questions. All right. Thank you again, Audrey and Mackenzie. All right. So now we're going to transition into our research panel. So I'm going to start bringing these up, and then we're going to, how we'll run this is we'll have each researcher come up and give a little presentation overview of their program and updates on some of their research. And then we'll have a panel at the end, and I'll facilitate a question and answer session to get some more details and information about what you guys hear. Our first panelist is going to be Dr. Susan Cushman. I'll also add and thank you to Dr. Cushman for joining our planning team this year and really helping us to get the contacts and get some of the speakers, along with Stacy Fergal, our fisheries specialist. Because again, this is a first time kind of catering to this audience. So we're learning as we go, but appreciate all the help that Dr. Cushman and Stacy provided. So I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much for that introduction. And I'm happy to have everybody here. I'm glad to see that there was a great turnout, both in the room and online. I am going to introduce to you some of the work that I've been doing. This kind of represents the way I think, but also the way I teach and the research, resulting research that I end up, I've been doing over the last 15 plus years here in the Finger Lakes. So I work at Hobart and William Smith Colleges, and we work in conjunction with the Finger Lakes Institute, which is a nonprofit organization at the colleges that essentially runs all of our invasive species management for the Finger Lakes region, the PRISM in the Finger Lakes, as well as a lot of water quality research. Probably has some answers about your HABs question earlier. And so I am the representative with respect to fisheries research from the colleges here. So I am a stream and river fish person. I am trained at University of Maryland, and I did my PhD in small stream fish and really the effects of kind of land use perspective, ultimately changing habitat and water quality, and that's translated into some of the research that I've done here. So I'm going to take you on a little journey from the headwaters to the lakes and tell you a few things that I've been involved with in the region. And first of all, because I cannot do all of this work myself. Most of my work is at field work. These are just pictures of some of my students that I've worked with over the last 15 or so years. I do, as you can see, I do a lot of electrofishing surveys. We do seine net surveys. We've done a number of outreach, and the last kind of mini chapter that I'm going to go into involves connections to the local angling community and some of the other collaborators that are on the research panel with me. So, oh dear, that's adjusted. Okay, so the way I like to think about things is like, you know, where did we come from? So if you talk to anglers, maybe like Stephen's grandfather, or even before, some of the indigenous communities around here, you would ask them what was living in their small streams, and they would say this. The things that are just kind of swimming around, probably not too important, are the black-nosed dace, creek chub. Those are the fish that are eating the insects and invertebrates in the streams. Same thing for mottled sculpin. Mottled sculpin is something that is very different because it sits on the bottom of the streams and rivers, and therefore eats a lot of insects that are crawling around the substrate. And then we have our prized brook trout. Brook trout being the top predator in the stream, but also the fish that our state has as its namesake fish. So that was the historic stream fish assemblage. And what do we have now? Well, it's different. And there's a number of reasons for that. So we've lost the trout, we've lost the brook trout in most of the waters around the Finger Lakes. And then we have some other fish that have changed their abundance in these small streams for a number of different reasons. Primarily because maybe some of those top predators are gone. And so now there's a greater abundance and diversity in some of those streams. But also different, you know, some of the fish here are probably something that would occur in a slightly larger stream than the smallest headwater streams, like the white sucker. But they're definitely common in all the streams that I survey regularly, even the common shiner. The central stone roller is a really interesting fish because it actually is an herbivore. It rolls the rocks around on the bottom of the stream and eats all the algae. It has a plate that it scrapes off the algae and the fungi that live in the stream and literally kind of cleans the rocks. So that's kind of different, but kind of an interesting perspective from fish diversity. So I'm going to tell you 3 little stories about fishes in the Finger Lakes, and I'm going to cover kind of different areas, but generally I'm located at the top of Seneca Lake, which, do I have a pointer on here? I don't even know. What's that? Ah, yes. Okay, so we're up here where it says Seneca Falls. That's actually Geneva. That's where we all are right now, those of us in the room. So I'm working mostly in the Seneca Lake watershed, but I do have projects all over the Finger Lakes. Okay, so the first project that I'll talk about is the potential for brook trout reintroduction. I was asked by the New York State Park staff to determine whether or not it was possible to reintroduce brook trout into some of the state parks in the Finger Lakes region. And the 4 state parks that I was asked about was to survey were the ones here in the eastern Finger Lakes. So Fillmore Glen, there's at the south end of Owasco Lake, Taganic Falls State Park, Robert H. Treman State Park, and Buttermilk Falls State Park, all draining eventually into Cayuga Lake. And the interesting thing is that they said, well, there's also this place that you can kind of compare this to, which is Reynolds Gully. And this is a place where there are wild brook trout. It drains into Hemlock Lake. And so that's in the western Finger Lakes. If you look up where brook trout are still around and are present, there are a number of areas east of here that have brook trout, but most of the brook trout in the Finger Lakes region are on the southern ends, either in the Cohocton River drainage or in a few of these places in the western Finger Lake tributaries. So the left side, the left picture here is Reynolds Gully, and then the right side is Taganic Falls State Park. And so you may say, oh, there's not that much difference here. There's lots of trees, there's tributary, there's substrates, there's flow, there's changes in water quality or changes in water speed. But we did do stream surveys in all of these electrofishing surveys and all of these streams to see what was there and what actually could potentially support brook trout in the future. So this is a kind of a big table of numbers, but I'll point out a few things. One of them is that buttermilk, which is on the far left there, has a lot of different species of fish. So that's kind of interesting. A diverse stream means that it has a lot of resources for a lot of different types of fish. And a couple of other things that was kind of interesting. There's Taganic has a pretty good small fish abundance or diversity of small fish. And interestingly enough, Reynolds Gully has very little diversity, but it had 29 brook trout in it, right? So interesting, like diversity, it doesn't necessarily mean a good place for a trout to live. However, this is something that, again, if you think about that classic historic small stream, it had brook trout and black-nosed dace and a few maybe other species. So based on this, you might say, oh, okay, all of these streams had fish living in them. They had a diversity of fish. Interestingly enough, Fillmore Glen, which is south of Owasco, had only 2 species. It's pretty classic for a stream around here, small stream. But the one thing that is concerning from a fisheries perspective is when you have other trout species, it's probably not a good place for brook trout because they compete for resources, for habitat, for the best place to get drift coming downstream. And so this kind of automatically knocked treemen out of the possibilities. We also looked at some other things related to habitat. So obviously oxygen is really important. Cold waters hold oxygen better than warmer waters. And so kind of as a surrogate for temperature, you can say, all right, well, at least at this point in time, dissolved oxygen was high in most of these places, in these pools. However, it wasn't for Taganic, and so that's not good. So obviously, if you look at these lines, the orange line is the lowest threshold for dissolved oxygen for brook trout, and the blue line is kind of a threshold for pool volume for brook trout. So how much space is available for these trout to live, to move around in. So Taganic had a really poor habitat with respect to space and oxygen and cold water. But some of these other places, buttermilk had a great habitat. And as you can see, what's interesting is Reynolds Gully is right on the line of that pool threshold, a pool volume threshold, which is interesting. So clearly, maybe not in the place that I was sampling. Maybe there were some other areas for trout to live in, but it was right on the line. What about temperature? So we had a couple of temperature loggers in here in our streams. We had lost a few, which is always not a good sign either. If there's that much sediment and flow moving through the system, not a good place for potentially something that has to withstand those flows. So all of the blue line goes above that, again, that threshold for brook trout, but the green line very rarely does. And so buttermilk in this case is probably a better place than Taganic. So in all of our work, we found that a possible place or places for brook trout reintroduction in state parks, because this is obviously something that anglers like to fish for, but they also like to fish for native species in a place that is open to everybody, would be potentially Fillmore Glen, which is the picture on the right, and then Buttermilk Falls State Park on the left. And this is way upstream, had mottled sculpin in it. It was really a great habitat for a lot of fish and a lot of diverse habitat as well. So the second little chapter I'll share with you, a little project I have been interested in is the round goby. And the round goby is an interesting fish species in the US because it has caused a lot of concern over changes in the forage base for Great Lakes fisheries. Stephen talked earlier about the providing food, and that's a very common interest for anglers to say, well, we've lost a forage fish here, we're gonna add it by this species, it's non-native. The challenge with round goby is that it can spawn up to 6 times a year in optimal conditions. And it also really competes very well. It outcompetes other fish that we do hold a little bit higher in the ranks because of their native status. So they're from the same place that the zebra mussels and quagga mussels are from. So they're evolved to actually eat them as well. So you could say, well, that's a great thing. They're there. they can actually try and maybe control or at least pose some sort of reduction in mussel bed abundance. But it also is a great place, a great way to increase predation on some of our game fish eggs in the larger lakes. And they can live in a wide range of environments in which, interesting, during the winter right now, those gobies are down deep. And then in the summer times, they move up onto the shorelines, onto the littoral regions, which is how I actually studied them because I could collect them very easily along the shorelines. But this time of year, they are down deep where the water temperature changes less than on the edges. So we went into, I've been interested in this for the potential for invasion in Seneca Lake. In 2023, it was confirmed that the round goby entered Seneca Lake via the canal likely. It's been in Cayuga Lake since 2013, I believe, 2011, 2013. And so we knew it was coming. And so some of my students set out on a project to look at, first of all, where is it in the lake? And this was this past summer. So we did a number of surveys along the lake shore. And we found that we did these specifically where there were streams entering the system, because I'm also interested in their movement upstream into some of these tributaries. So we found that they were in all of those tributaries, Castle Creek, Wilson, Coshong, Big Stream, and Reeder, which minus the Reeder, all of those are on the west side of the lake. And then Cayuga Outlet was interesting. We actually went up probably about midway in the outlet past Dresden, and there were no gobies in there. So I'm not sure how long that's going to last, but they're currently not in the Cayuga Outlet in the main channel. But then, so these were all places where they were in the lake near the tributary, and then we ended up going and staining the stream systems as well, and we did find them in Wilson Creek, Big Stream, and then also in Reeder. So they are starting to move upstream, which is going to change the invertebrate and other fish communities upstream as well over time. So we looked at what they were eating. And so this particular slide shows what they've been eating in the streams and lakes from this past study. These the fish that were found in the lake were eating mostly invertebrates. Those are non-mussels or non-snails, so insects or other invertebrates. But they do eat mussels, they do eat snails, they do eat other crustaceans like little side swimmers. They eat eggs, and some of them had empty stomachs. When you look at their stream, the stream fish, they were also eating the invertebrates and the mussels, and some had empty shells. So they are eating things that are available to them in the bottom of the stream. And the reason why I'm interested in that is because that changes the prey base for the other small stream fish, and will ultimately modify the abundance of those prey in the stream. So there's been studies on tributaries to Lake Erie by some colleagues at University of Buffalo, and they have shown this, that it definitely changes the things like, for example, chironomids. These are the non-biting midges. So on the right side here, Chironomidae are the grouping of organisms that are non-biting midges. They're those things that create those clouds of insects that look almost like mosquitoes along the side of the road. They don't bite you, but they are very small, kind of bothersome insects. They eat a lot of them, and so do all of our other small fish. The next two categories on the right pie chart are mayfly families, and then we've got caddisflies as well there, and those are all fish. Those are all insects that a lot of fish, including things like obviously the classic trout. If you are a fly fisher, you're going to put on a mayfly or caddis on your end of your fly or on your line, and that is what the fish are going to go for. So those are things that are naturally in the stream, but they're going to be consumed quite quickly by the round goby. Now, in the lakes, this is data from a number of years ago, like 6 or 7 years ago, and we looked to see what the gobies were eating in Cayuga Lake. So as I said, I could quickly pull them out of the lake over at the Cayuga Lake State Park, and this was something that was great for student projects and also to learn about what the potential might be for Seneca Lake. But as you can see, they're mostly eating mussels. As I said, they've evolved in the same place that quagga and zebra mussels are found in, and so that is pretty pretty logical perspective thinking about what they eat. But they also are found to eat some other things, including snails. They eat, again, amphipods are those side swimmers, little small crustaceans that are an important part of any fish that is swimming around, and then hemimysis. Hemimysis is the invasive kind of cousin to the native mysis, which is what our lake trout in the big lakes here are eating down at the bottom. They're also a crustacean, look like a small shrimp-like organism, and this caused some concern for some of the work that my colleagues at Hobart and Lee Smith Colleges and others have done. And so we started to look at what is it that these fish would actually eat and potentially modify as prey base in the lakes. So that was from taking fish and looking at their stomachs. This is actually from a tank study that we did where we gave them a certain number of different options of prey to see what they would like to eat. And what was interesting is that these prey, so these are some pictures of them. So the amphipod, which is on the far right, and the hemimysis, which again, hemimysis is invasive. The amphipod is not, it's native, at least in general. There are a number of native species here. We specifically gave them these species, zebra mussels as well, or sorry, quagga mussels ultimately, and then some snails as well, and they quickly chose those free-swimming prey that swam in front of their face, right? So round gobies are definitely bottom feeders. Their eyes are on the top of their heads, so they're looking at what's above them. And so things that are moving around, they're going to go after really quickly and very abundantly, whereas something like a snail or a mussel they're going to have to go and search for it or ultimately crack the shell and get to the food. What's interesting when you compare these two categories, there's something that's soft and squishy versus something that's kind of hard and you have to get to the good stuff inside. There's a lot of interesting kind of ecology behind this, that you would choose something that's easy to get to or that's tasty without a lot of extra debris, right? But if it's going to take energy to go after it, you might choose something else that you just is sitting there in front of you. So this was interesting because we knew that they ate mussels, but when given the choice, they would actually go after these really fast swimming organisms. And this might be good to say, okay, well, another invasive is eating an invasive, the hemimysis, which is something that, again, also comes from the Black and Caspian Seas. But it does also potentially represent something like the native mysis, which we already know, at least in Seneca Lake, is likely depleted over time. So the other interesting thing, of course, when you do research, there's things you never ever expect, and that is that we found a number of snail shells that were empty. So we believe that the gobies actually sucked those right out of their shells. These were nighttime experiments, so we put them in, and actually back here. So this is kind of a lit up view, but we put these tanks outside during a sunset. They sit out there for about 2 hours. And then we sieved all of the water in there, all of those tanks, lots of replicates, into the wee hours of the night, and we found empty snail shells. So interesting, you learn something new about these things. But what's interesting here is that there were some species of snails that they went after, again, more regularly than or more abundantly than others. And I think that some of that has to do with the thickness of the shell. If they could crush it, or if they can't crush it, maybe they just suck it out. So you never know these things until you actually try to figure out what's going on. So the goby story is a challenging one because they're here. As of last year, I've found many of them this past year in many places. They're here to stay. There's nothing really we can do about them. But interestingly enough, the next little chapter here I'm going to share with you is about the diet of lake trout and other salmonids in Seneca Lake based on a study that was initiated because anglers in the region were very concerned about the work about the catch that was available. And so we worked with Seneca Lake Pure Waters Association to actually spend some time looking more specifically at the diet of various things, including lake trout. And we took advantage of the Lake Trout Derby. It is the lake trout capital of the world here in Seneca Lake. And so I initiated this project back in 2022 with some folks at the Seneca Lake Pure Waters Association, as well as SUNY ASF, Roxanne Razavi, who's speaking here in just a bit. And so we started to look at something that we could handle, which was looking at diet, first of all. And we used the derby as a mechanism to collect fish that are at the bottom of the lake that we don't have the equipment to collect. So we essentially asked anglers as they came into the weigh station to donate tissues from the fish so that mostly the organs, right? A small piece of the fillet for other contaminant analyses and other diet analyses that we can do in a biochemical way. And it was a great success. We collected, I should know this, but we collected about 40 something, actually no, probably, do I have it on here? Yeah, a lot of fish. This was actually all the lake trout in over the 3 years. So about 90 fish, lake trout over the years. But we also collected any of the salmonids that they brought in. So brown trout, lake trout, landlocked salmon, and lake trout. We specifically started this for lake trout. And what the concern though was that lake trout were getting smaller, they were getting less abundant, they were declining in the lake. And so our quest was to see if we could learn anything about that. So we analyzed the condition factor, which is a way to estimate how healthy they are. So essentially, if you were to think about how a fish grows in length, it puts on a certain amount of weight over time. And so a fish that has a higher condition factor is more heavy compared or at a certain length than a fish that is maybe skinnier, if you will, or not as heavy. And so what's interesting is that the condition factor of lake trout in Seneca Lake per our derby sample, and granted, these are the biggest fish coming out of the lake for at both the north and the south ends of the lake, were best in 2024. So that's a good sign. Great to see that. There was some really interesting spread of the data as well. Those bars that go way up mean that some of those fish were really healthy, really quite heavy for their length, if you will, in comparison to some of the previous years. And when we ran the statistical analysis, these were actually much healthier from a weight perspective than previous years, 22 and 23. And so what did we do? Well, we ended up taking those stomachs, we took them apart, we identified everything that we could possibly identify, and those fell into the categories of alewife, for those that are out there on the water, sawbellies, a lot of stuff that's unidentifiable because it's partially digested. We even had some sculpin in there, we have mussels, we have leaf material, which is always interesting. And then some other insects and other fish species. There was this one lake trout that actually had in it it had a small young of the year a largemouth bass. It had leaf matter. It had a mussel. It had an insect. It had a sawbelly and something else. It was like it had clearly gone through a huge departure in its usual eating routine and maybe went up towards the edge of the water and then back down. But it was really interesting. I had not expected anything like that. So moving up in the water column compared to where it maybe usually eats. But as you can see, those diets vary over the years. And this past year, we had mostly fish with alewife in their stomachs. So a few more slides here. Essentially, when you look at the contents of the stomach from the lake trout, you can see, again, proportion of the prey, so just counts numbers. So most of those lake trout had alewife. Some of them also had a couple of sculpin, or at least one sculpin. Banded killifish, that was the other one. Banded killifish are small fish that live up on just under the surface of the water. They're top feeders, so they're going to be taking things off the surface of the water. When you have a fish that has eaten something that is maybe out in the middle of the lake and also on the top of the water, which is likely around the shoreline, that's pretty interesting biology there. And then the largemouth bass. Again, from a biomass perspective, a lot of it is stuff we can't identify from the weight of the matter, but there is Obviously, some of the matters identifiable as these fish species. And then looking at the other salmonids, this is from the first year only, so 2022, right? Essentially, what are the other species eating? A lot of alewife or sawbellies, a couple of other fish species in there. But generally, we have a lake full of a lot of alewife, and that's clearly the most abundant thing is what they're eating based on availability. And that's it. I guess questions wait till later or no?
We'll save the questions and we'll jump into the next speaker, and then we'll have
Okay.
you all come up and we'll answer questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so next I'll bring up Dr. Jacques Richard. He's going to be our next speaker with, I'm going SUNY Oneonta? Brookport, sorry. Ooh. Then this will be your clicker.
Thank you, Mike, for the introduction, and thank you all for coming today. So I'm Jacques Richard. I'm a professor at SUNY Brookport in the Department of Environmental Science and Ecology. And I will be talking a little bit about the research that I'm doing at SUNY Brookport as well. And it's a good match, basically just after Suzanne, her talk showing about the diet, because you will see that in my talk, the diet is very important for the research that I'm doing. So that was a good introduction. I want to mention that we do go also in the field that we can use different methods to collect the fish, either using our electrofishing boat. We have also a small research vessel that we can go in Lake Ontario. We have backpack electrofishing, but we have also at Brookport a fish room where we can do basically culturing the fish. So we can see on those pictures, you have the some aquarium where we can culture fish. We have some larger tanks. We have even larger tank there. We have some hatching trays so we can incubate eggs and follow their development in the lab. And then we have also in the front of the lab, we have more piece of equipment where we can measure chemicals that we are having in those fish that we are interested in. And one that I will be talking today is this equipment here that is an HPLC. So basically for you guys, you measure the vitamin that we have in the fish, and then that I'm interested in. This one is a GC that's measure the fatty acid that I'm also interested. So we talk about the diet, and the diet is usually you are what you eat, correct? So basically, if you eat some good stuff, you are usually more healthy than if you eat some bad stuff. And the fish are doing exactly the same thing. So if you are a small fish, what is very important when we look at the fish, and my interest is mostly looking at the reproduction of the fish. So I'm interested about their diet and how the diet can affect their reproduction and overall their health. So that's what I'm doing in the lab. And you can imagine that if you have a lake trout, for example, in the lake, or in the either the Great Lakes or the Finger Lakes, they eat alewife, and then we know that at that time you may have some issue with them, with their progeny, so their babies. They will produce basically what we call a thiamine deficiency, that it's a lack of vitamin in them, and basically those fish will most likely die. And basically, we didn't know originally that there was a thiamine deficiency in the lakes and that they were affected, those lake trout eggs were affected by thiamine deficiency. It took place probably around the 60s and the 70s, where the hatchery manager, when they were basically trying to go and capture some lake trout to basically collect their eggs, because they were needed to stock those fish in the lake back later on. They were capturing those eggs, fertilizing them, and they were observing some mortalities. And they didn't know it was thiamine deficiency at that time. They were just, dealing with that. And the first step that they did, it was basically increasing the egg take. So they were taking more eggs to be sure that if some die, okay, that's fine. We will have, a supplement of eggs. So they were taking more eggs. And at one point, the Great Lake Fishery Commission, which is this binational between Canada and US agency, started to say, we need to find out what is going on, because in the 80s, there was around 80% of the fry that were dying basically in the hatchery. So they needed to do something. And then several researchers look at it, and they found out that if you treat basically the eggs of those lake trout with a thymine, so you put them in a thymine bath, the eggs will be fine, and you will have, the progeny will swim normally, and there will be no issue. So since then, we have basically a big program, and I will talk about it today, that deal with monitoring this thiamine. So just thiamine, so it's vitamin B1, and vitamin B1 cannot synthesize by the fish, and we can also not synthesize that vitamin. The only way they can get their vitamin is by the food they eat. This again, to show you their prey is very important, because you are what you eat. So if you don't eat it, you will not be able to put it in the eggs, and then you will not be able to reproduce properly. It's very important for the growth of the fish, very important for the metabolism. So basically everything swimming, everything the fish are doing, it's required thiamine. And it's also very important for their neurological function. So when they move, so there is some coordination that takes place. It's usually the nervous system that is involved. And if you don't have thiamine, your nervous system will not work properly. And I want to show you two movies, because I think sometimes it's better to see some visuals. So you will see those are stilet trout, and you will see on the top some fish that are, oops, some fish, where is my movie here? Oops, they were, oh. I was saying the movie would be better, but I don't think it will work. So let me see if I can go here. I was supposed to show you some movie, but I guess that will not work. So let me go on the slideshow. I said, if you want to try it, that's
Because it's online.
So, but basically what I wanted to show you on top, you were having some fish that were in a good condition, that were not affected by thiamine deficiency. And in the bottom, you were having some fish with thiamine deficiency. So let's see if we can get this going. Maybe. Yes. So here is the fish. So you can see they are swimming freely, and they swim pretty nicely in the container. And then in the bottom, you can see those fish that are basically swimming in spiral. They don't behave. I mean, that's not a normal fish, correct? So everybody agree with that. And then you imagine that if you have a predator that is coming above here, those fish will be able on top, will be able to escape. The one on the bottom will not be able to escape. So, and then if you are really very low in thiamine, you may die, basically. So that's the thiamine deficiency. And I will say that it's not only characteristic of our region in the Great Lakes or in the Finger Lakes region, but it's now all about, I mean, in the Northern Hemisphere, we observed that also in Europe. So in the same time that it was discovered in the Great Lakes, we call it at that time early mortality syndrome. In the Finger Lakes, it's called the Cayuga syndromes. And then in the Baltic Sea, it was called at that time the M74, because it was the year that it was discovered. But you can see other organisms are also affected. Some birds are affected in the blue mussel in Europe, alligator in Florida. And then since 2020, the Chinook salmon in California. And we have a big program also that we work with California, and my lab is in charge of running all their thiamine program there. So as I say, we can treat basically the fry with thiamine also. So we can treat the eggs, we can treat the fry with thiamine. And again, here you will see this movie where we have the fish that are deficient in thiamine here. They don't do very well. We put them 1 hour in a bath with thiamine. Thiamine is a water soluble, so it's dissolving in water. And after an hour, this is how the fish look like. So they look pretty happy and everything is fine. So you can basically supplement thiamine. So if you, the only thing you need to be in a lab situation, correct? So in the fish in the lake, there is no thiamine, at least that we know in the water. So that's the problem. So in the Salmon River hatchery, as you can see here, this is some picture where they treat basically the eggs. So all the eggs, the salmon eggs that they are treating them with thiamine to be sure they can replenish the thiamine if they are deficient. And then this is another method that you could do is basically inject the adult. So when the adult are, migrating, well, there's on their spawning ground, you could go and inject. So this is mostly done in hatcheries because they know that they can keep those brood stock in their hatcheries, so they can inject them. And then usually we see an increase of thiamine in the eggs after the injection. So, but that's the way that you can replenish the thiamine in those. So we need to know the cause, and that's one part that I am involved is trying to know why they have this thiamine deficiency. One of them, so as I said, the thiamine is coming from the diet, okay? And we cannot, and the prey fish cannot synthesize thiamine. So thiamine comes from the lower trophic level. So that's your phytoplankton, also bacteria. So maybe we have a decrease of thiamine at the lower trophic level. There is also some thiaminase, which is an enzyme that degrades thiamine. I will talk that in a second. And you may have also some prey that are rich in lipid that can be a cause of thiamine deficiency. Then ultimately, the predator don't have enough thiamine, not enough thiamine in the eggs, and then it will result of a prey that fry that will not do well and most likely die. So our prime suspect for this work here in the Great Lake is our alewife. So our alewife, so lake trout are eating alewife. Alewife will produce, lake trout will produce eggs that are deficient in thiamine that will induce this thiamine deficiency. And as I say, thiaminase is very high in those alewives. So if we look at here, you have the alewife, and we know the amount of thiaminase is pretty high. Thiaminase is an enzyme that degrades the thiamine. So if the fish is taking a lot of thiamine, it will be degraded into those two compounds here by this enzyme. So, and you can see some other organism. We talked about earlier in the previous talk about the mussel. So you can see the mussel are also rich in thiaminase, so that's not good. They could be, if any organism that basically eat those mussel could be suffering from thiamine deficiency. And then as I mentioned, alewife is a very important organism that contain a lot of thiaminase, sorry. And then another issue that we can have, so we know thiaminase is rich in the prey, but it could be also, so synthesize de novo. So the fish could synthesize their own thiaminase. We don't know yet why, because why you produce something that is deficient, that will produce something bad to you. This is something that we are trying to look at, but there is some study that show that the fish could have the ability to produce this thiaminase. And then I mentioned the high lipid diet. So if you are rich in lipid, like an alewife, so if you look here, you can see this is some study that was done from my research group in Lake Ontario, where we measured the lipids. We compare basically the alewife, round gobies, and rainbow smell, and you can see alewife contain a lot of lipids. So it's pretty good if you eat, a lot of lipids, because you may think you get a lot of energy from it. So it's maybe good for the fish, and you get your big, predator that becoming pretty fat. So, but the problem is that if you have a lot of lipids, you need to protect those lipids because the lipid can go bad. So what we call oxidation of your lipids. So you want to protect them. And one mechanism that we have is to use some antioxidant, and vitamin B1, the thiamine, is also an antioxidant. So thiamine will be used to protect those lipids. And then, so if you have a lot of lipids, you may have less thiamine, and that will be a problem because when the predator will get less thiamine, they may produce eggs that are also deficient in thiamine deficiency. As I mentioned, our lab is responsible for monitoring the thiamine all around the Great Lakes, the Finger Lakes, as well as Lake Champlain. And those are the sites that we every year we receive some eggs. The program started in 2001. And then it's going, every year we receive eggs, and you can see those stations in all the lakes. We sample, my lab is sampling just in Hamlin Beach. We sample also with the help of New York DC in Tokanok, in Cayuga Lake, basically when they do their sampling, their egg stake in the fall. So we are also sampling with them at that time. And then we look at them, and I'm showing you here the result for 2023. So last year, because we are in the process of analyzing the eggs for this year. When I say this year, it's the fall 2024. So you can see Lake Superior. So I want to point before I go for a few results here. I want to mention this line here, which is basically a 4. It's not written here, but it's a 4. And the 4 is the threshold that we want to have the eggs above. So if we have all the eggs that are above, normally they should do well. If you have below, we'll have some issue of thiamine deficiency for those fish. So as you can see, Lake Superior, There is not a lot of alewife there in Lake Superior because this is the extreme range of their expansion there. It's too cold basically for alewife. So usually they don't eat alewife because there are not a lot in the lake. So the thiamine concentration in the eggs is pretty high. Lake Michigan, you can see some station. We have some issue there, even though we have some location where we have higher level, but we have still a lot of fish that are below the threshold of 4 nanomole. Lake Huron, high level, this is mostly because of the crash of alewife that's occurred in 2003. So the alewife collapsed in the lake. And then since then, we see an increase of the thiamine concentration in the eggs because the lake trout redirect their source of food. Basically, they eat some other prey. Lake Erie is doing pretty well. Also not an alewife lake, I would say. Lake Ontario, it's a big alewife lake, but again, some changes. And last year was pretty good, I would say, compared to the previous year. And then if you go Lake Champlain, it's not good. We have a lot of fish below. Same thing for Cayuga Lake. So where the fish are eating a lot of alewife, as Susan mentioned before. So we have in the Finger Lakes region, the lakes, it's mostly alewife lake, basically. But if you look at the long term, I am taking this from the Finger Lake region here from Cayuga Lake. So we can basically follow those long trends. So from 2009 until 2023, we can see that the level were pretty low in thiamine. So we have an increase of thiamine in 2015. And then now it's looked at, seems to be stabilized, going a little bit lower around the threshold that the fish should be. Important to observe here is our rongoby when we started to observe them, so where they were introduced in the lake. And it's looked like when rongoby was introduced in the lake, we see basically after a couple of years that the concentration of thiamine started to increase in our lake trout eggs. And we think that it's because the lake trout started to shift their diet, and they probably started to eat more guppies in their diet instead of eating alewife. So they were eating a lot of alewife, then they started to eat guppies. Now we think that they may have now, you know, the population exploded of rongoby when they were there. So we think that it's just because now there is a stabilization in the population of rongobies and the lake trout need to feed, so they will go back to their guppies. And this is why we think that is happening there. So what we are trying to look now is to see, can we see that by looking at the diet of the fish? So if we can follow what the lake trout is eating. So imagine that you have a lake trout and we can look, you know, at the prey that is available. And as Susan mentioned before, we can look at their stomach content, so to see what they are eating. But in my lab, we are looking at something different. We are looking at some biomarker that are fatty acids. So fatty acids are part of the lipids. And then if we analyze them, we follow the principle, you are what you eat. So normally the predator will have the same fatty acid than the prey. So, and then we go in the lake like Susan is doing. So we collect some small prey because we need to know what are the concentration of the prey. We collect also, and you can see here a nice, you know, each point is a prey, and it's including basically around 27 fatty acid. So, and we can see that we have a nice separation. If you look at the fatty acid signature of your rongobies, it's completely different from an alewife. So we can say, okay, if you are eating a rongoby, I will be able to see on the predator that you are eating a rongoby, compare if you are eating an alewife. And then we can go more in detail and look at which fatty acids are very important in alewife. So we know, for example, this 18, 1, and 9 is very important in alewife, and then the 16, 1, and 7 is important in rongobies. And then we will look mostly in our predator about those two fatty acids, and we can try to compare what is going on there. And I want to mention that because when we look, and I'm shifting a little bit gear, but this will be helpful for explaining what is going on in the Finger Lake region, is looking at what is going on in Lake Ontario in terms of our lake trout. And we have basically in Lake Ontario two forms, what we call a lean form, and we have a umper form. So the lean form is coming from Seneca Lake and the Lake Champlain. So there's two different strains. This is the strain that are stuck in the lake. And the lean are more pelagic, so they are feeding mostly on alewife, basically. In contrast, the umper or the superior Klondike, this is more a benthic fish, so they will eat mostly on the bottom. If they are in Lake Ontario, where rongoby is present, they will eat rongobies. And we can look at that, And when we look at the thiamine concentration in those fish, we can see that if you are a lean form, so those two lean strains, the Lake Champlain and the Seneca strain, we have low amount of thiamine in the eggs, and then suddenly if you eat the Klondike, so if you are from the Klondike, you will have higher level of thiamine in your eggs. So those fish are more eating basically round guppies, and the other one are eating alewife. And we can look at that because we look at their fatty acid ratio. Those two fatty acids that I was telling you before, the 16, 1 and 7 and 18, 1 and 9. So if we look at those ratio, we can see it's very low. And because we know that this is the fish that are mostly eating alewife, and this is very high for the fish that are eating a lot of round guppies. So that's giving us an idea about, so there is a switch. So if I go back to what I was telling you before, so basically here, after the introduction of round guppy in the lake, we have probably a shift basically in their diet. So they started to target the round guppies instead of eating alewife. And then we saw this jump in this thiamine level that was beneficial. So Suzanne mentioned round guppy, maybe not so good. If we look at the thiamine, I will say maybe they may be okay. So this is always like the perspective that you need to take when you are saying an invader. What are the good, what are the bad, correct? So in this case, it may be a little bit good to have this predator in the lake. So, and then just to show you again, so that's this ratio and about those two fatty acids. And then if you have a higher ratio, you are mostly having a higher concentration of thiamine. So it's better, basically, those fatty acids are helping us basically to understand what the thiamine concentration will be. And then this is why, again, putting together and putting the relationship between the diet of the fish, basically, and their thiamine concentration will be important. So this is the interaction, nutrition, reproduction that I'm mostly interested in studying in those. So as I say, so when I'm seeing the fish, I'm always thinking about, what is a good fish? What is a bad fish? What is, I would call it the ugly fish. So my lamprey will be my ugly fish. I would say, for my work at least, the alewife will be my bad fish, and I would say my guppies may be the good fish, correct? I don't say that an invasive is good, correct? I want to be sure that it's recorded, so I'm saying to be sure that, I'm not saying that, but for the perspective of thiamine, maybe a garon guppy may be a good fish. So I want to, I will skip that, and I would just want to say, let me go, because I see that we are short on time. So I want to thank, again, a lot of students that work in my lab over the years, because they do all the collection, they do all the analysis in the lab, all the agencies that help us to collect also some fish or fund our work. And then also all the partners that are involved in this big monitoring program, because we work with the state agency, we work with the feds, we work with the tribes, we work with universities all around the Great Lake region that can provide basically all those eggs for us for the monitoring program.